Forget the big names for a second. Karlo Makovic might be the surprise breakout who gives the Pelicans exactly what they've been missing. I'll break it down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Thursday, we are covering a lot of ground in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. We're going to look at Karlo Makovic potentially being a massive X factor for the Pelicans. He brings a skill set that basically no one else on the roster has. So if he does play well and earn a solid rotation spot, that can be a game changer for New Orleans. Then we're going to look at Anthony Davis. He has to be on the franchise's Mount Rushmore, but it is complicated. We'll dive into his case, but also why I almost left him off despite all of the accolades. And then the Pelicans have a new two-way player in Bryce McGowens. We'll break him down. I'll tell you where everything stands on that. So we got a lot to talk about in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget, you can also catch us at 10:30 a.m. every single weekday on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. If you're in New Orleans, that's channel 7.1 over the air. Same place you watch your Pelicans play, which is really, really cool. So we'll get into Anthony Davis. I'm not gonna make you listen to me, have me talk about Anthony Davis to start the show. I know my audience better than that. I want to instead look at Karlo Makovic, because this is someone who was a rookie last year after spending some time in the G League and overseas the year before that after being a second-round pick of the Pelicans, and played fine. In almost 19 minutes per game, 42 games, 7 starts, 7.7 points, 1 block per game, 1 assist, 5 rebounds. Did not shoot the 3 ball particularly well at 32%, let's call it. And there you have it, right? That equates to per 36-minute numbers of 14.8 points per game and 9.5 rebounds. So basically like a double-double with almost 2 blocks. That looks a little bit better there. And while he didn't play with the team in Summer League, and look, he doesn't need to. This is someone who's got a lot of professional experience overseas. I do think he's someone that, if this season goes really well for him, can be a massive X factor for the Pelicans. Right now, when you look at their center position, and he can kind of be a power forward or center depending on where he needs to be. Probably more of a 4 than a 5, but we've seen him play the 5. Look, he's 6'11". He's got the height that you need for that spot. Look, the Pelicans have maybe, arguably, the worst center rotation in the league, right? It's Yves Missi, it's Kevon Looney, it's kind of Derek Queen in there, and it's Karlo Makovic in there too. Like, that is not particularly great in my opinion. So if you can have one of those guys take a massive leap, and maybe it's Missi, it's not going to be Looney, we know who he is, and Derek Queen's potentially not going to be ready to start the year, and he's a rookie, he's going to have struggles here. It's kind of on Karlo that if he takes a massive leap, that group I think gets elevated, because this is a young center who has good size, that has skills that no one else on this team really has. Who's the shot blocker on this team, right? Who's the rim protector? There isn't one. That was not what Yves Missi did particularly well last year. Missi's a rim runner, post big, right? Makovic, though, can be your rim protection and three-point shooter. Looney's not really shooting threes. Missi's not really shooting threes, though he's shown it off at times, right? Derek Queen's a work in progress when it comes to three-point shooting, though can get the shot off even if he's not a good three-point shooter. But Makovic came into the league as a guy that you would expect to be a stretch big. And if you're a stretch big, that's important because this team has Zion Williamson. And we saw them play Zion Williamson with Kelly Olynyk a bunch last year, and you saw the court open up a little bit. or you just simply had someone that would make threes and punish the defense for the way that they defended Zion Williamson. That's what you're looking for with Karlo here. Can he be a 3-and-D big man? Doesn't need to be an elite 3-and-D big man. Doesn't need to be, like exceptional. He just needs to give you some of that so you have that option, because right now there isn't really like a stretch big that you can point to and be like, that dude's going to do it. It could be Karlo, right? You don't see a rim protector like that guy could be the rim protector, or that guy is the rim protector. It just really could be. When you look at the advanced stats for Karlo Makovic, he's got a block rate of a 5%. 4% is about like good enough to get by. Not a great number, but like a fine enough number to me. So he's a little bit above that. He's a good enough defensive rebounder. He's at 20.4% last season. That number should go up. But we've seen some bigs on this team have like 15% when it comes to it. So his numbers are kind of like above average for this group, even if they're just kind of average across the league. But given that the center position is not particularly great for New Orleans, I'll take average right now, right? Like that's what I'll take here. And I think Karlo's a guy that, if he can shoot the 3 ball consistently, will be in the rotation for this team. You really want to see Zion next to a stretch big. You'd like it to be an elite stretch big. And, Brooke Lopez at one period of time, some other guys out there, Miles Turner. Those names have never been realistic for New Orleans, really. They've called in the past about Miles Turner. But Indiana was never going to trade him at that point. And then he got good last year, or past 2 years, really. Anyway, besides the point, we're not talking about Miles Turner. If Karlo Matkovic can fit that mold, that's a paradigm shifter, in my opinion, for this team. Like, that's the player that you've never really seen next to Zion Williamson that, whenever Zion's tenure here ends, whenever that is, it would be disappointing if we didn't get to see him next to a stretch big like that, let alone one who it has potential to be a good shot blocker. Karlo has pretty good athleticism, at least, like above average to really good athleticism, in my opinion. He's got good instincts to hunt down shots and block them, particularly as a trail man from behind, coming from the weak side or something like that. He moves well. He moves like an NBA player. That's at least something you want to see from guys. And he's at times kind of been a bit of a lob threat. That athleticism lets him get up and flush down lobs. They just don't run enough like big to big action, I think, here in New Orleans. But now you have a group of big men that you can. Misi is a rim running, lob threat big man. Makovic can be that too, while shooting the 3 and giving you rim protection. Looney's just a solid dude that's a better rebounder than he appears for his size. And Derek Queen's the big unknown, but Queen has potential to be a very, very special kind of big man. Hence why the Pelicans traded up to draft him. But he's not going to be ready to start the year. Looney's going to be giving you 15 to 20 minutes. That's it per game. Misi still has a ton of room that he needs to grow as well. So it kind of falls on Karlo as, almost like, one of the more established players because of his time playing overseas. He's 24, he'll be 25 this season. Makes him like old with this group when it comes down to it. So I think he is the type of guy, as I yawn here, that if he takes a leap, it gives you the type of player you don't have anywhere else on this roster. And that's something that I think the Pelicans need. So if he has a breakout year, very, very good thing for New Orleans. Think he's in store for a breakout year? Is he an X Factor? Is there another X Factor you think? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. The Karlo Crazies probably loved this segment, but I think Karlo can definitely do some really great things. So coming up next, we're going to talk Anthony Davis. He has to be on Mount Rushmore. It is complicated though, but when you remember what his accolades and how well he played here in New Orleans, you got to put him on. But doesn't mean he has to stay on for forever. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you're going to stop just managing your money and you're going to start building your wealth. When I put all of my accounts in there, and I love it because you could just put them all into one thing and I don't have to go to multiple apps. They make it super easy. I had a couple of subscriptions that I didn't even realize. Canceled those, saving more money. Look, my fiance, we're getting married here. We've got financial goals we want. It makes managing our money together so that we're both on the same page. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And don't forget, you can watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every weekday at 10:30 a.m. By the way, if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. For your second listen, it's Locked On Saints with host Ross Jackson. Ross is covering everything black and gold at training camp. They're going to be going out to California soon. He's going to be traveling with the team. Boots on the ground reports from training camp. What more could you want? Make Ross and the Locked On Saints podcast your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get into, I don't know if it's an elephant in the room or what. Anthony Davis. We're doing the Mount Rushmore for this Pelicans team. We put Chris Paul on there. I put Baron Davis on there. David West is on there. Look, it has to be Anthony Davis. It has to be Anthony Davis. It's not Zion Williamson. You've got to play more games than that, right? You've got to play in the postseason. It's not Brandon Ingram. Anthony Davis has a better just statistical career here in New Orleans. You could make a case for Drew Holiday. That makes sense. Herb Jones hasn't been here long enough. You've got to have more playoff success than that. That's why Anthony Davis just has to go on, right? Like, I don't feel great about this. Truthfully, I really don't feel great about this. I was covering, I've been doing this so long that I remember when he got the number 1 overall pick. I was covering the team then. I remember how nasty his exit was too, and that changes his legacy here in New Orleans. But when you look at Anthony Davis and his time here in the Crescent City, the dude was dominant, had tons of accolades, and basically like a historic impact while having a complicated legacy, but also, look, leading this team to some of its highest moments as well, right? He was the number 1 overall pick. There's a ton of expectations onto that. Look, and he lived up to it. He exceeded the expectations, I think. He played 466 games here in New Orleans, and he averaged 23.7 points per game. Where did the block number? 2.4 blocks per game as well. 1.4 steals, 2 assists, 10.5 rebounds, which is a wild number to see when it comes to how the Pelicans have struggled rebounding. Got to the line almost 7 times per game and shot it at an 80% rate. Didn't shoot the 3 ball particularly well, but also shot 52% from the field. Those are pretty incredible numbers, right? He finished second in Rookie of the Year. He was 6-time All-Star here in New Orleans. He made All-NBA 1, 2, 3 times as well, and 3 All-Defensive teams. Like, those are unbelievable numbers, truthfully. And look, his career is kind of punctuated for this team by them sweeping the higher-seeded Portland Trail Blazers in the first round back in 2018. That year, by the way, he was just good. Let me pull those numbers up here for you. 28.1 points per game. He led the league in blocks at 2.6. He led the league in blocks 3 times here in New Orleans. 28.1 points per game, 11.1 rebounds, 2.6 blocks, 2.3 assists, 1.5 steals. Those 8 got to the line 8 times and shot 83% from that. He also shot that season 34% from 3 on 2 attempts per game. Finished 3rd in MVP voting, 3rd in Defensive Player of the Year voting, an All-Star, All-NBA first team, All-Defensive first team as well. Like, that's arguably one of the better seasons in franchise history, right? Like, that was a dominant period of time. Led the league in blocks 3 times. He was top 5 in scoring for multiple seasons. It's not a common thing that you see, and that peak year that he had was really something great. He was also the All-Star MVP in 2017 when it was here in New Orleans with all of that. When you look at players in franchise history here, no one has the kind of hardware that Anthony Davis does. No one has the kind of hardware that Anthony Davis does in terms of individual accolades that he received. And he was easily regarded as a top 5, top 10 player during this time. And look, while he didn't make the postseason a ton, and I do attribute a ton of that to Dell Demps and that failure, he was good. In 2015, when they made it the first year, 31.5 points per game, 11 rebounds, 3 blocks. Those are insane numbers. When they swept the Portland Trailblazers, right, and did that at home, 30.1 points per game, 13.4 rebounds, and 2 blocks. And that one, we know the picture of, is it Nurkic on the ground and Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday pointing at him, or AD is flexing after like dunking on him, and then Drew Holiday is pointing at him while he's like on the ground. Just completely dominant on both ends of the court. And that helped get the Pelicans their only playoff series win in the past like 15 plus years. That's a pretty important thing. So when you're kind of looking at those type of players, right? The accolades, the on-court dominance and stuff speaks for itself. He should be a no-brainer to put on Mount Rushmore, but I almost left him off. And I'll talk more about this in tomorrow's show a little bit too. I almost left him off. Look, that exit from here in New Orleans was so bad in my opinion. Y'all think it was too. It was terrible. We remember the final game, right? The final game, the trade request, and then the "That's All Folks" shirt, which, like, I don't know how you come back from that. It was interesting that when he requested a trade, and then they fired Dell Demps like 2-3 days later after that, he requested a trade, and it was kind of like a well-known thing he was going to request a trade. I completely forgot the point I was going to make. It was just kind of well known that season he was telling players in the locker room, like, yeah, I probably want out. And then he went scorched earth on the team to try and make that happen, using his representation, Rich Paul and Clutch Sports, to just try and like strong arm the Pelicans into just giving him what he wanted, and like, which was to go to the Lakers, right? Which no one's going to feel good about. And then the team just didn't, and then it just got ugly and ugly and ugly. Where they're like, well, we're going to shut you down. And then he's like, well, no, I want to play, so you got to play me. It was just this whole awful thing. The point I was going to make was, the team kind of failed Anthony Davis. There were failings too, right? Like all of the injuries. His nickname was, questionable to return. The guy probably has mutations from so many MRIs and x-rays that he's gotten, right? But I think a lot of people understood that when he did request the trade, it was more the franchise that had failed him, right? The Dell Demps era was not good, and they did not build a good roster around Anthony Davis at all. And again, AD didn't help himself with this either. But I think a lot of people understood. It was like, you know what? You're right. This franchise hasn't done it yet. Go off and do your thing. And I think most people, when that Anthony Davis trade request came out, like actually in the moment just did get it. Similar to the Chris Paul one, right? But it was what Anthony Davis did after, when he didn't get his way, acting like a spoiled, petulant child. And then the stuff with the "That's All Folks" shirt, like, he's like, people pick out my clothes. And it's like, wait, excuse me? He's like, people just put them on. They're there on the bed and I wear them. And it's like, man, you're an adult, right? Like, it was just such a cop-out. Like, own what you're feeling and what you were thinking. And he wasn't able to do that, and people hated that, right? Then it was like, well, when I leave, I'll do an Instagram post like everybody does, and he like still hasn't thanked New Orleans, right? Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Whenever someone thanks someone, New Orleans is like, this guy did it before Anthony Davis thanked the Pelicans and thanked the city of New Orleans. Like, yeah, there's a bunch of screw that dude attitude that is completely valid and justified, right? But look, he never had a consistent co-star during his time here. Drew Holiday was injured too, and a little bit up and down. They made very questionable decisions of trading first-round picks and all of that to try and build around him. So that should leave him off. I've talked about how the off-court stuff matters when it comes to this, right? Chris Paul just being that guy. David West, the hardworking guy on the court that never complained, never did anything bad. Baron Davis, though his tenure here is short, was electrifying. It was important to establish basketball in the city of New Orleans, and also took the team to the postseason back-to-back years, which that's only happened twice in franchise history. So the off-court stuff matters to me, and I was ready to leave Anthony Davis off of this. But then I looked at just how statistically dominant he was, the individual accolades that he had. I just don't think you can leave him off, right? Like, I almost went with a cop-out move. I'll explain what that is in tomorrow's show. But I do also think there's like the right to reserve to remove him from this Mount Rushmore. And if we're actually like carving this into a mountain, I would make his face smaller than kind of the other ones for like people to really know. I'd have all the other heads be exactly the same and then ADs be smaller as kind of like there's some stuff with this, right? There's some baggage with this here that we don't particularly like. He also has the franchise records in scoring, blocks, and a number of other categories too. Like, those are pretty important things to keep in mind as well, that, you do have to kind of recognize his tenure here, even if like, screw that guy kind of thing, right? It's like a friend who used to be a really good friend of yours and then betrayed you in some capacity. Doesn't take away from the friendship you had. You might despise the guy now, but there were some good times there too. I got lost in this analogy. Let's just move on from it. So I'll ask you this. Do you have to put Anthony Davis on? Do you hate me for putting him on there? Do you get that just because he was so good statistically that you have to? Let me know what you think. I'm prepared to get roasted in the comments here on YouTube, but I think he has to be on there. So that makes our Mount Rushmore: Chris Paul, Baron Davis, David West, Anthony Davis. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. So coming up next, new two-way player for New Orleans. We'll break it down. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there's no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget, you can watch Locked On Pelicans, Locked On Saints, Locked On LSU, and Locked On SEC, all on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Just put it on at 10 a.m. Let it run through noon. We got you covered there with all the shows you want to hear. Ross Jackson, me, Matt Moscona, Chris Gordy. It's like three of them, minus me, is like an all-star lineup there. So the Pelicans, it was announced by Shams Charania, have signed Bryce McGowens to a two-way deal. This is someone who's got some NBA experience here. He is a two-guard with really good size at 6'7". Has kind of bounced around the league a little bit between the NBA and the G League. Started with the Charlotte Hornets 2 years ago, played 2 years with them in Charlotte, played in 105 games here, a handful of starts, 5.2 points per game. He can shoot the three pretty inconsistently. He's a 33% from three in his tenure with Charlotte. With Portland, this was last year, 13 games, very limited minutes per game at 2.5 minutes per game. He averaged 1 point per game. We're not going to hold that against him if you're only playing 2.5 minutes. That really can't do anything. I'm curious what his per 36 minutes are after 2.5 minutes per game. It's good. It's 14.6. That's not bad. 14.6 and 2.3 assists. He was a G League, an all G League guy last year. I think the Pelicans just decided Quinones wasn't it. He didn't he didn't stand out in summer league to me. I think that was part of the problem. And we've seen this new front office not want to keep a lot of the old guys here. They're doing a lot of roster turnover. That applies to the two-way contracts as well. So they have Trey Alexander. They have Hunter Dickinson. Adding in like a two-guard, I think, a guy that can also play a little bit on the wing as well, is a smart move. This is just someone they clearly like. I don't know if there's like a Troy Weaver connection in there just yet or anything like that. Maybe there is. Someone will have to let me know if that's the case here. He's not a guy that can shoot particularly well, and that's kind of, I think, what concerns me about him. This team needs more shooting. Those two-way contracts are a good way to add some cheap shooting. And so to go after Bryce McGowens, look, again, good size. If you're big on size, length, height, all of that, this is the right kind of guy to give a flyer on. He's got a lot of NBA experience, which I think is an important thing too. This is someone who's played 118 games in the NBA, started 21 games as well. So he's got experience at the NBA level, which look, that I do think that can go a long way of you get what it takes. He's bounced between the G League where he's far succeeded that. Hasn't done the best at the NBA level, but definitely has some potential. If his shooting can come around, great. For a team that maybe feels they're a little bit undersized in the backcourt, Jeremiah Fears is slightly undersized. Jose Alvarado's definitely undersized. Maybe you just want to add some size, some length there. That's definitely, potential as well. So I don't know. They're two-way guys. You don't really look for them to do big things. Look, in the G League, he was great. 29.3 points per game, along with 4.1 assists and 3.3 rebounds, right? He was all NBA G League second team, and he had a spot on the G League's Rising Stars team at NBA All-Star Weekend. I don't know. It's good, but we'll see if it ends up translating. Two-way guys it can be hit or miss with, but they've done a good job of kind of developing those guys. We'll see if Bryce McGowens, look, at least he's got some NBA experience. I like that. We'll see what ends up happening there. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. We'll dive into the Mount Rushmore a little bit tomorrow. I'll tell you what I was thinking about doing with that fourth spot that wasn't Anthony Davis, because that the way he left the team really still rubs me the wrong way. I know it kind of rubs everyone the wrong way. Screw that dude. That kind of attitude is very, very justified when it comes to Anthony Davis. But I just think the statistics are so good, you've got to put him there. So we'll talk more about that, probably a little bit of trade talk and some other things in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans as we close out the week. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. See y'all tomorrow.